I didn't expect to remember the touch of his hand after so long. But it took only that yellowed envelope resting on my table for a whirlwind of forgotten or carefully buried sensations to sweep through my chest like a warm wind at the end of summer, the kind that announces change even before a cloud appears in the sky. 30 years. I said it out loud, as if trying to give shape to a ghost, as if speaking the time aloud could erase the pain it carried. 30 years since I last heard his voice, since our last exchange of glances, since the love of my youth turned into silence, and now, before me, a letter, handwritten, with his handwriting that I still recognized, even after everything. The same hurried stroke, slanted to the right, as if the words were eager to leap off the page and reach me. The same name on the return address, Thomas. But before that, long before, there was a summer I never forgot, even though I tried with all my strength. I was 19, my feet firmly on the ground and my head full of dreams that barely fit inside me. I lived in that small town where everyone knew everything except what truly mattered. And then he arrived. Thomas was the opposite of everything I knew. He had a carefree laugh and a way of walking that seemed to belong nowhere. He was handsome, but what captivated me was his gaze, a look that questioned, probed, dove deep. He saw me, and that was far too dangerous for someone like me, who spent her life trying to fit into molds that never made sense. With him, I didn't need to hide anything. With him, I could be whole. Our love was swift but profound, like a flame ignited in dry grass, too intense to last, and yet impossible to forget. We spent hours talking about what we dreamed of, what we feared, what we wanted to escape. He spoke of leaving that place, of exploring the world, of not being swallowed by a mediocre life. I spoke little, but listened to everything. He told me I was his home, and I, foolishly, believed that was enough to hold him. But time passed, and the promises began to fade. There were silences he didn't explain, restlessness that grew in the middle of our afternoons. And then, without warning, he left. No letter, no note, no word, just absence, a void, an emptiness. For years, I learned to move forward with my heart in ruins. I married, had my daughter, worked hard. I smiled at parties, fulfilled obligations, hung pictures on the wall. But somewhere inside me, something remained suspended, an unbroken thread, an unanswered question. And now, decades later, that letter appeared as if time hadn't passed, as if the clock had stopped back then, waiting for one of us to have the courage to return. I didn't know if I wanted to read it, but I couldn't not read it either, and perhaps it was in that first moment, when my eyes landed on his words, that my past began to catch up with me again, not as pain, but as a second chance. In the days that followed, everything around me began to adjust to that moment. It was as if the entire universe, with its haste and noise, paused for instants to honor the silence that existed between us. People kept passing, trains kept arriving and departing, but for me, everything happened in a kind of background. The truth is, when he was there, it was as if the world stopped. There was a calm that filled me, a strange sense of familiarity, as if he were already part of my story before I even met him. And, in a way, he was. I didn't know his name, but I recognized his presence with a precision that frightened me. It took only a step from him towards the platform, and I already felt his arrival like someone sensing their own heartbeat shift rhythm. I began to observe him more closely, with more care. He always wore the same headphones, though I knew there was no sound in them. It was as if they were a reminder that silence was part of who he was, and he didn't fight it. He embraced it. Sometimes I saw him close his eyes during a slower piece, and a discreet smile appeared on his face. One of those smiles not meant for others, but for himself. That touched me in a way I couldn't explain. I, who always thought the beauty of music lay in being heard, was discovering another layer, a new way of feeling. I began to play for him. Not for the audience, not for the station, but for that man who listened with his skin and returned with his gaze a response that made my chest tremble. And so, without any effort, he became a presence. Silent, constant, transformative. We didn't speak. We had never even greeted each other. And yet, each encounter felt more intimate than the last. I started dressing differently without noticing. My lips sought a softer shade of lipstick. My hair demanded a little more care. I didn't want to impress him, not exactly. It was more like I wanted to be worthy of the connection we were building, even if no one else could see it. And then one day, as I played one of my compositions, I noticed his eyes were teary. I didn't cry, but I felt exposed. For the first time, someone had seen me without hearing me, and for some reason I didn't fully understand. That silence between us said more than any words. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the paper. The ink was slightly faded at the edges, as if he had sweated while writing or held the letter too long before sending it. The paper carried a faint scent of something old, a mix of dust, ink, and longing. I read the first lines cautiously, almost in whispers, as if they were too fragile to be heard aloud. He began by saying he didn't know if I still lived in the same place, but he had to try. He said he had thought of me every day. Yes, every day, and that no matter how far life had dragged him, no distance could erase what we had lived. Thomas didn't apologize or try to justify his departure. He just told his story. He spoke of the roads he took, the places he passed through, the mistakes he made, the nights he woke with my name caught between his teeth. He spoke of me as one remembers a harbor, not as a place left behind, but as something that always existed, even when the sea was stormy. I finished reading and stayed there, motionless, sitting at the edge of the kitchen table, staring at nothing. His words danced in my head like loose leaves in the wind, and though part of me screamed to ignore it, another part, the one that still knew what it was to be looked at with that spark in his eyes, was already wholly wrapped in the memory. It wasn't just longing, it was a reunion, not with him, with myself, with that version of me that had been left behind with him. The Eleanor who laughed loudly, who ran barefoot without fear of seeming foolish, who believed in the power of a promise made under the sunset's light. I had tried to smother that for years, burying it under commitments, maternal duties, rigid schedules, and resigned silences. But a single letter was enough to make it all resurface. In the following days, I kept that letter folded inside the drawer of my dresser, in the same place where I keep my most important documents, and I returned to it every night, sometimes just to touch it, other times to reread a specific passage, the one where he said, "If I could go back to the day I left, I would have stayed, not out of fear of losing the world, but out of fear of losing you." That pierced me like a gentle blade, reopening an old wound I thought had healed, and so, between memories and hesitations, I began to write too. Not as a reply, not yet, but as a release, as a confession. Letters I didn't plan to send, but that helped me piece together the fragments of myself that remained. I wrote about what I felt when he left, about how much it cost to learn to stand again on my own. I spoke of my daughter, my mistakes, the nights I dreamed of him and woke angry at myself. I talked about the woman I had become, and without realizing it, I began to write about what still remained, of me, of him, of us. Because despite everything, despite 30 years of silence, there was something there that hadn't died. and I needed to understand what it was before it was too late. I remember exactly the morning I decided to reply. The sun streamed through the window with a gentle clarity, the kind that doesn't warm right away, but promises a beautiful day. I took a sheet of paper from the bottom of the drawer, one of those left from the days when I still wrote letters to my mother before she passed. The pen hesitated in my hand. It was strange to think that after so long, I was about to converse with someone who had become more memory than presence. And yet the words came, not as a torrent, but as a delicate spring, breaking the silence with sweetness. I wrote without haste, without worrying about seeming strong or sensible. I said I had received the letter, that I was surprised, that I needed a few days to breathe before facing what it stirred in me. I told him my life had moved on, that I had been happy in many moments, but that there was always an echo of what we lived lingering nearby, like a faint perfume that persists even after washing your hands. I was honest. I said I didn't know what he expected from this, that I had no ready answers, but that I was grateful he had written, and above all, that his gesture had reached me in a place where I thought there was no longer room to bloom. I didn't ask him to write again. I didn't promise anything. I just left a calm period without resentment, an open line to chance or to time. But deep down, I think I knew. I knew that thread, stretched between us for so long, was finally being pulled again, as if our lives, so different, could still meet halfway. His reply came a week later. This time, it was shorter. He said he didn't want to invade my life, that he expected nothing more than to hear from me, even if just once. He wrote that if I was willing, he would like to see me. A meeting. Without the past, without promises. Just two people who loved each other once and somehow still held space for one another. It took me 2 more days to decide, and when I finally replied, I said yes. Not a cinematic yes, laden with romance, but a serene yes from someone who understood that some stories don't need to be erased to move forward. Some stories just need to be closed with truce, or perhaps rewritten. And for the first time in many years, I felt something different in my chest. It wasn't longing, nor fear. It was hope. A mature, silent hope, made of scars that no longer hurt. It was like returning to a place that was once home, and discovering that despite the aged walls, there was still warmth in the air. The day of the meeting arrived like any other. Nothing in the sky or the wind announced that my life was about to turn another page. I chose a simple but careful outfit. Not to impress, but because I wanted to feel whole. I looked at my reflection in the mirror with attention. The white strands now framing my face, the fine lines around my eyes, and a gloss on my lips I hadn't worn in years. It wasn't vanity. It was ritual. A silent gesture to myself, as if saying, "You're still here." I arrived a few minutes early, as I always did. I chose a table near the window, ordered tea, and took a deep breath. My heart didn't beat like a teenager's, but there was a slight tremor in my hands, an expectation that came less from romance and more from humanity. Because there he was, Thomas, gray hair, thinner than I remembered, but still with that same way of looking that made me feel like time hadn't passed. He smiled when he saw me, a shy, restrained smile, as if afraid of startling me. But I smiled back, and in that instant, everything that could have been said in the last 30 years was summed up in that look. There was no blame, no pain. There was presence. The conversation began cautiously. We spoke of the present, of my daughter, of his life in other cities, of the places he visited, of the losses he faced. Time had spared neither of us, but there was an unexpected sweetness in the way he listened to me, as if each of my words were a gift. And little by little, the stiffness of the reunion melted away. We began to laugh at old memories as if rebuilding a bridge with planks of memory. He didn't try to justify what he did, and I didn't try to understand. Perhaps because we knew certain answers no longer mattered. What was there before us was what still remained, and above all, what could begin. When we said goodbye that late afternoon, he didn't ask for anything. He just thanked me. He touched my hand gently and said that even if that was our only reunion, it would already be enough to heal a part of him. And I understood, because there was also something in me settling back into place, an old wound that could finally heal, in peace. In the days that followed, something in me changed. It wasn't euphoria or that teenage excitement that kept me awake waiting for a call that might never come. It was something deeper, quieter, like a window being slowly opened after years of being closed. The air that came in was familiar, but I was no longer the same woman who had last breathed those winds. And yet, there I was, feeling that each word spoken in that reunion had settled in me with a lightness I hadn't expected. Thomas didn't reappear with promises, and I didn't offer guarantees. But the simple fact that we had seen each other, talked, laughed, and above all, listened to each other, had reawakened in me a forgotten presence. A woman who still knew how to love with kindness, even after everything. He wrote to me again. A few days later, a short, direct, almost shy note. He said coffee with tea wouldn't taste the same if taken alone again, and there, he left an invitation for another meeting. Nothing grand, just a walk in the park where we used to stroll together in the summer we fell in love. I hesitated, not out of fear of him, but out of fear of what that gesture meant, because accepting that invitation was, in some way, admitting that the past hadn't been buried, only asleep. But there was also in me a serene courage, blooming quietly, like a flower that doesn't need to be noticed to exist. So I went, without expectation, without haste, just with presence. The reunion was light. We talked more than the first time, as if that first coffee had broken the shell of silence. Thomas was more open, more willing to show himself. And I, curiously, was too. We spoke about how the years shaped our choices, about losses that taught us to respect time, and about that strange feeling of rediscovering something that seemed lost forever. He asked if I had kept any of the letters I started writing after receiving his. I smiled. I said yes, but that I wasn't sure if I was ready to share them. He just nodded without pushing. That's what I noticed most about him now, the absence of urgency, the patience of someone who had already learned that everything true has its own rhythm. And it was in that rhythm that we began, without meaning to build a new routine. A phone call here, a letter left at the front desk, an invitation for a walk, a conversation that lasted longer than time allowed. We didn't talk about us as a future. We didn't treat each other as a couple. It was something subtler, more delicate, as if we were recognizing each other, layer by layer, without rushing to get anywhere. And little by little, I began to realize it wasn't just about him. It was about me. About how much I had closed myself off, without noticing, to everything that could be deep or true. And about how, perhaps, I was still willing to reopen those doors. I started noticing the small things, the way he still ran his hand through his hair when nervous, the way he paused before answering something important, as if weighing each word with respect, and the fact that, even after so long, he still looked at me like someone who sees, not just observes. That disarmed me in a calm but profound way. I caught myself smiling alone while folding clothes or washing dishes. It wasn't a wide, open smile. It was an inner smile, from someone who had rediscovered a piece of herself she thought was lost forever. One particularly cold afternoon, he showed up with a book in his hands. It was an old novel, one of my favorites, that I had mentioned during one of our walks. He didn't say anything when he handed it to me. He just extended the volume with a discreet, almost complicit smile. And in that simple gesture, there was something I hadn't seen in years: attention. Not the kind of attention that's feigned, but the genuine kind that listens even to what isn't said. I invited him in. We made tea. We talked until the sun disappeared completely. And when he left not only the book on the table, but a gentle presence in the house, as if, even absent, he lingered for a while. It was after that I began rereading my letters, the ones I had written right after his first letter. Some were stained with tears I couldn't hold back at the time. Others were almost harsh, as if written by a woman who wanted to seem strong even while shattered. But there, amid so many words, was a truth that pierced me entirely. I had never stopped loving, not in a romantic or idealized way, but in an essential way. Thomas had been part of my formation, my story. Trying to erase that was like trying to erase my own skin. And the most surprising thing was realizing that what I felt now wasn't a repetition of the past. It was something else. A new, mature tenderness that didn't ask for promises, just presence. One night as we walked arm in arm through the same park where we used to run, young and in love, he stopped suddenly. He looked at me with a seriousness he didn't often show. He said he expected nothing from me, that there was no intention of rewriting our story as if it had never had cracks, but that, if I wanted, we could write something new, not to replace, but to continue. With all the marks, memories, and silences that now made us who we were. I didn't answer right away. I held his hand tightly and kept walking, because sometimes the answer is in the gesture. And in that moment, my hand in his said everything my heart was still learning to accept. In the days that followed, I noticed something different in myself. Something that couldn't be explained in words, but revealed itself in the details. I woke up with more lightness, moved through the house with more calm, prepared breakfast, as if it were a small sacred ritual. And I realized this didn't come just because of him, but because somehow I had allowed myself to live again. The reunion with Thomas had reopened a door, but what I found on the other side was a version of myself I thought I had lost. The woman who still knew how to feel, trust, desire. And that, in itself, was already a gift. But it wasn't perfect, nor did it need to be. There were days when doubt knocked at the door of my heart like a colder wind, reminding me of the past, of the scars. There were memories that hurt, words that were never said and even now were still missed. Sometimes, when he told me about the paths he took, the faces he met, I felt a pang of envy for the time life stole from us. But I didn't let him see it, because soon after he would say something like, "I thought of you when I saw the sunset in that place." And what could be more intimate than being remembered even when absent? It was one Sunday afternoon that he brought something that completely disarmed me, a box, small, wooden, aged. Inside letters, mine, the ones I had written to him and never sent, years ago. He had kept them. How? I didn't know. But he told me that before leaving, he had passed by my house in an impulse that never came to fruition, and by chance or fate, the window was ajar. On the desk, the letters. He took them, read them, kept them, and left, without the courage to stay. I couldn't hold back the tears, not from anger, nor from pain, but from everything that wasn't and somehow still remained. He apologized, said he had no right, that it was selfish. And maybe it was. But in that moment, all I felt was gratitude that those words had survived time, and for finally having them back, because they said more about me than I had ever been able to see. They were witnesses to my love, my strength, my courage to keep going even when he gave up. That night he stayed, not out of impulse, nor desire, but because the silence between us was finally at peace. We slept together for the first time since we were 20, not like two young people clinging to the intensity of the moment, but like two survivors of time, pain, and choices. We slept with steady breathing, fingers intertwined, and a calm that needs no words. When I woke, he was already awake, looking at me with a serene smile. He said nothing. But in that look, I understood. The love that survives time isn't made of promises. It's made of presence. Time passed, but differently. It no longer rushed as before, as if pushing us forward mercilessly. Now it walked beside us, calmer, kinder, and we followed it without urgency, without fear of falling behind. There was no longer a need for grand gestures, sweeping declarations, or elaborate plans. What existed between us was the simplicity of two gazes meeting in the same direction, even after having traveled such different paths. And that was more than enough. Thomas became part of my routine, not as a visitor, nor as someone taking up space. He fit there as if he had always belonged, like a note missing from a song I didn't know was incomplete. Sometimes he showed up with simple flowers, daisies, lavender, saying he thought of me when passing the market. Other times, he arrived only with silence and offered me coffee. And there was something so beautiful in that unassuming daily life. One rainy afternoon, as we folded clothes on the couch and listened to the sound of drops on the roof, he looked at me sideways and said, "We aged beautifully, don't you think?" I laughed, and I said, yes, because it was true. There were wrinkles around our eyes, white strands among the brown, aches in our backs when we woke. But there was also peace, complicity, and the lightness of not needing to prove anything to anyone. The letters were now all kept in a box he gave me, larger than the previous one, with room for everything yet to come. And we kept writing. Small notes left on the table, short messages by the bedside, annotations inside books. It wasn't an imposed ritual. It was our affection, a way of recording that we were there, even on days when silence seemed enough. My daughter was surprised at first. She found it unlikely, almost unreal. But seeing our gestures, our calm smiles, she understood. She said it felt like watching two teenagers in grown-up bodies. I smiled. But deep down, I felt we were more than that. We were two souls who had found each other at the right time, which may not be the ideal time, but was the possible one. And sometimes the possible is where the miracle lives. Over the months, we began traveling together, not far. Small towns, new cafes, hidden inns. But each place became the setting for a new memory, as if we were painting together a picture. We started sketching decades ago and only now found its colors. And even on ordinary days, when everything was just the repetition of routine, there was beauty. Sharing silence, cooking together, sitting on the porch at dusk, everything was full of meaning when you're aware of the time you lost. And, above all, the time you still have. Some nights, we woke for no reason, just because the years taught us that sleep ages too. In those early hours, he would pull me gently and say he was grateful to be there. And I was too, because more than a reunion, this was a choice. And choosing someone every day, even after so much life lived, is the purest form of love there is. Yes, love triumphed. Not because everything was perfect, nor because there was no pain, but because, even after 30 years of silence, a single letter was able to rebuild the bridge between two hearts that never stopped searching for each other. Years later, on a sunny autumn morning, I found a new letter on the table. The handwriting was familiar, but the paper was different, firmer, more beautiful. Thomas wasn't home at that hour. He had gone for a walk, as he did almost every day. I sat slowly, my heart tight with a sweet and sad premonition. I opened the envelope carefully, as if I already knew that piece of paper carried more than words. He had written to me the night before. He said that if by chance this was his last letter, and he didn't know if it would be, he wanted me to know once again that he loved me with a depth he hadn't imagined himself capable of, that this second chance had been the greatest gift of his life, that aging by my side taught him that love isn't an urgency, but a silent construction made of small gestures and constant presence, and that, even if one of us left first, what we built would be eternal, because it was etched where time doesn't erase. He returned from his walk with a smile on his face and a bag of apples in his hands, as if everything were still in place. And it was. We stayed together for a few more years. Good years. Calm, light years, full of everything we lacked back then. When he left for good, he took nothing, just left one more letter and a note with 4 words on the pillow. Thank you for waiting. Today, I keep all the letters, his and mine, in a light wooden box lined with blue linen. Sometimes, when the wind blows a certain way through the window, I sit in the living room armchair, put on my glasses, and read one aloud. Not out of longing, but out of gratitude, because love doesn't need to be immediate to be true, and sometimes it doesn't arrive when we expect it, but when we're ready.